So, why do people hate Jesus? We just sang this song, right? This is great. This is great stuff. Like, people don't hate Little House on the Prairie, but they hate Jesus. Like, why is that? It does not make any sense. What are these words? Did you read these words? I mean, outside of, we said, bringing in the sheaves over and over and over again. Outside of that, the whole song is based on the second phrase in the first verse. Sowing in the morning, and what are we sowing? We're sowing seeds of kindness. And the whole rest of the song, the whole rest of the first verse and the whole rest of the second verse is, when do you sow seeds of kindness? You sow them in the morning. You sow them in the noontide. You sow them in the dewy eves, and you wait for the harvest, the time of reaping. You sow kindness. You're kind. You be kind. You're kind. People are criticizing you. They're getting on your case. What do? You repay them with kindness. That's what you do. You sow in the sunshine. You sow in the shadows. You're not afraid of clouds or winter's chilling breeze, right? You sow kindness no matter what. That's the sermon, or we're done, right? But that's it. That's what Christians are supposed to do. So why do they hate Jesus? Like, does that just not baffle you? Like, Jesus is the kindest, nicest, most perfect friend you could ever have, and people don't like Jesus. Christians aren't supposed to be involved in public life. You're not supposed to. There's a separation of church and state. You're not supposed to impose your faith on anyone else, right? We're supposed to just stay back and be quiet. And yet here we just sang, hey, be kind, be kind, be kind. That's what Jesus teaches us. Be kind, and be kind. And yet they wanted to kill Jesus. Why is that? If you've been following along, if you kept your bookmark in the same place from last week, we're in John chapter 7. I'm going to read the first 5 verses of John chapter 7. I might read all the way to verse 10. But I'm going to read John chapter 7. And in John 7, chapter verse 1 says that the Jewish leaders are looking for a way to kill Jesus. They want to kill Jesus. They don't like Jesus. Why is that? This is what it says. After this, Jesus went around in Galilee. He did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. But when the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles was near, Jesus' brother said to him, leave Galilee and go to Judea, where everybody's trying to kill you. Like, leave Galilee and go to Judea so that your disciples there may see the works you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world. For even his own brothers did not believe him. Therefore, Jesus told them, my time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because I testify that its works are evil. You go to the festival. I'm not going up to this festival, because my time has not yet fully come. After he had said this, he stayed in Galilee. However, after his brothers had left for the festival, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. So Jesus goes around healing people, he feeds people, and he's like Mother Teresa and the Live Aid, We Are the World guy coming together, feeding people and healing people, and yet people are trying to kill him. And Jesus tells us why. Jesus tells us why people are trying to kill him. John 7, verse 7 says, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify that its works are evil. So the world is actually okay when we sing bringing in the sheaves, because bringing in the sheaves tells Christians that you be kind, you be kind, you be kind. But when you start to say the works of the world are evil, that becomes a problem. That's why the world does not like Jesus. Jesus comes along and he says all the other religions of the world are idolatrous. In other words, they're worshiping other gods. All other religions are not equal ways to finding God. Only Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And once you say that, you're not being kind anymore, are you? You're telling the rest of the world that their truth claims, they are wrong. The other religions of the world are wrong. And people don't like that. When Jesus testifies that the works of the world are evil, people don't like it. When Jesus comes along and says marriage is one man and one woman, the rest of the world doesn't like that. When Jesus says the works of this world are evil, people don't like it. When Jesus comes along and says that having too much material wealth and not using that wealth for the kingdom of God is evil. It's hoarding things for yourself and keeping things for yourself and ignoring the rest of the world, people don't like that. Jesus testifies that the works of the world are evil, and people don't like it. And so Jesus is hated because he declares that the world is evil, that the practices of the world are evil. And if you follow through the Gospel of John, when Jesus begins to say that I am the one that will give life, that I am the one that will give the Holy Spirit, that I am the one that will lead you to the Father, that I am the only one that will give you life, that I am the only one that will feed your soul, that I am the only one that will lead you to the Father, people begin to drift away from Jesus. There's a little verse in chapter 6, just a couple verses before what we just read, verse 66 in chapter 6. It says that when they heard Jesus saying these things, many turned their back and left Jesus. When Jesus began to get all exclusive, it didn't feel like kindness anymore, and people began to turn their back upon Jesus. When Jesus began to say, I'm not going to follow the ways of this world, the world began to turn its back on Jesus. And that'll happen to you, right? That'll happen to you. Once you begin to live your life in a different way than the rest of the world, then you are a kook, right? That you are a nutcase. Why would you do that? Why would you act that way? Don't you know that your kids will turn out weird if you act like that? Don't you know that people are talking because you're acting like that? And the world will turn its back on you. But if you've turned your back on the world and you're chasing after Jesus, then you are heading in the right direction. Jesus says, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because I testify that its works are evil. He says that to people who are following the ways of the world, right? So in other words, if you're following the ways of the world cannot hate you. But if you follow the ways of Jesus, then the world will hate you as well, because its works are evil. So Jesus' brothers tell him, hey, go up to the festival, show yourself, take part in the ways of the world. His brothers at the time, before they received the Spirit, before they knew who Jesus was, before Jesus was resurrected, his brothers were all caught up in the world. They're like, hey, Jesus, take part in the ways of the world, show yourself, and you can accomplish what the world wants you to accomplish. And Jesus says, no, I'm not doing that. My time has not yet come. I am not governed by the world's schedule. I'm governed by my Father's schedule. I'm not governed by the ways and the things that the world values. I'm governed by the ways and the things that the Lord, the Father, values. And that's a hard statement to make for you and I. To say, hey, I'm not going to be caught up in the things that this world thinks are important. I am going to follow the Lord. I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to follow the Father and not care what the rest of the world thinks. Now Jesus gives us some insight into how you and I can know whether or not you're following Jesus, you're following the Father, or whether you're following the ways of the world. Because truth is, we're caught up in the world, right? All of us all of us have to, put on our socks and our shoes, that all of us have to go get our groceries at Hy-Vee. We're caught up in the system of the world. And you think to yourself, what do you mean, Pastor? It's just going to get groceries at Hy-Vee, right? And you're right. It's just the way that we do things in the world. It's just the way that we do things. And some of those things are just normal things that people have to do. And some of those things subtly point us in a direction that may lead us away from Jesus. And so Jesus gives us some insight here. He gives us some insight on how do we determine whether or not we're following after Jesus in everything that we do, or whether or not we're being subtly drawn into the things of this world. And he knows that's part of his mission. That's part of his goal. That's part of the reason why the Father has sent him to earth, is so that he can bring disciples, bring followers, so that they might be able to live a full life in the world. Let me show you what I mean. All right, so Jesus is going to Jesus says, "I'm not going to the festival. My time has not yet come." And then there's this weird verse. It's kind of fun. John 7:10. It says, "However, after his brothers had left for the festival, he went also, not publicly, but in secret." I like that verse. I like that. It means to be a follower of Jesus sometimes means that you have to secretly follow Jesus, right? It means that to be a follower of Jesus means that sometimes you have to do things they're not public and out loud and in front of everyone. It's that you have a mission in life. You're going to follow after Jesus no matter if everybody knows or not. You're going to secretly follow Jesus. Just like Jesus is secretly following his Father's plan, not publicly the way the world wants him to do it. Remember the people after he feeds the 5,000? What do they want to do? They want to take Jesus aside. They want to make him king, because that's what you do, right? The people of the world, we want a king. We want a leader. We want someone to solve all of our problems for us. We want a leader to do whatever it is that leader wants to do, and he will take care of all of my problems for me. And Jesus says, no, that's the way of the world. My followers, they work in a different system. My followers have the Spirit inside of them. They have a guide inside of them, and they follow their guide. So Jesus does these things in secret. Now, at the festival, verse 11, at the festival, the Jewish leaders were watching for Jesus, asking, "Where is he?" This festival in Jerusalem, Jerusalem went from, and these are some numbers that I heard, that went from a town of about 200,000 people to possibly having 1 million people there for a week-long festival in Jerusalem. That's what I hear. 1 million people sounds like a lot, but those are the numbers. So 200,000 people, and then Jews from all over come to the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths, and they live in Jerusalem for about a week. And so the Jewish leaders are there thinking, hey, this is the biggest festival, one of the biggest festivals of the year. Where's Jesus? He's obviously going to be here. They're looking for him. And then among the crowds, it says, verse 12, there was widespread whispering about him, because he's the big event these days. This Jesus who's out in the wilderness up in Galilee. Among the crowds, there was widespread whispering about him. Some said, he is a good man. Others replied, no, he deceives the people. But no one would say anything publicly about him for fear of the leaders. Isn't that a reflection of our day and age as well? Right? Like you don't want to raise your voice too high when you're having coffee, when you're talking about Jesus to somebody. Because you never know if you might offend somebody over there at the other table. Right? No one would say anything publicly about him. Not too loud about him for fear of the leaders out there. And Jesus is doing all this in secret as well. It reminds me of the Sermon on the Mount, doesn't it? Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, when you fast, don't go around telling everybody you're fasting. Do it privately. Jesus says, when you pray, don't go to the street corner and tell everybody you're praying. Raise your hands up on the street corner and pray. He says, Go to your private room. Go to your closet. Pray there in private. Because your Father in heaven, who knows what is done in secret, he will hear you. Your Father in heaven, who knows what is done in secret, he will hear. He will see you fasting. When you give to somebody, don't announce to everyone, hey, look at me, I'm giving something to someone else. Because your Father in heaven knows what you do in secret. We do things in secret as Christians, not because of fear of everyone else. We do things in secret because we follow a different pattern. We follow a different leader. We follow a different Lord who's humble, who's kind in all circumstances, who's not showy, who's not public, who's not in your face, who doesn't have 1,000 followers on YouTube, right? We follow someone who is quiet and speaks directly to our hearts. And it actually says, Jesus doesn't even go to the festival until about halfway through, verse 14. Not until halfway through the festival did Jesus go up to the temple courts and begin to teach. Halfway through the festival, people are already there doing their festival activities, going to the temple every day for worship, and then halfway through, Jesus begins to teach. And while he's teaching there, it says, the Jews were amazed and asked, how did this man get such learning without having been taught? In the other Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the amazement of the people is the teaching of Jesus himself. The teaching that he gives to the people. Everybody's amazed. This teaching is amazing. We've never heard anything like this before. And then in this case, in John, the teaching is, the amazement comes from the Jewish leaders can't believe that this unknown person who's never gone to the best schools, who's never learned from the best rabbis, he is able to teach. And look at where he gets his teaching from. This is the first application. John 6:18. Jesus answers that question. Where did you get this learning? How do you know? How do you know, Jesus, all this stuff? How are you able to make a good judgment? Jesus says this. My teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. Anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. I'll read that verse 17 again. You should probably underline that in your Bible. Anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. This sermon is titled, Making a Right Judgment. The first way that you're able to make a right judgment is by making a moral commitment to Jesus. I don't mean that you're saved by your moral commitment to Jesus by doing good works and things. But what I mean by that is by making a commitment to live the way that Jesus teaches you to live will help you to understand whether you're making the right decisions in your life. Anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. When Jesus says believe, all throughout the Gospel of John, what he means is you believe in your head and you believe in your actions. It's not enough to just say one thing and do another. This is something that goes from the Old Testament into the New Testament, and Jesus even quotes this. He even quotes this over and over to the people. He'll say things like, these people will praise me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Or Paul puts it this way. Maybe you've heard this verse in some evangelistic service sometime. Romans 10:9 says that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, then you will be saved. And that's the truth. But Paul's putting two things together there. He does not say, if you just believe in your heart, but it has no effect on anything else that you ever do in the rest of your life, you'll be saved. He says, you believe in your heart, and it begins to show itself in your actions by like the way that you speak, then you will be saved. And Jesus says the same thing here. If you want to know what is true, verse 17, if you want to know what is true, if you want to know if my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own, in other words, if you want to know what God says, then what do? You choose to do the will of God, and you find out. Sometimes that's you make a commitment, or you by saying a prayer to God and committing your life to Christ, and then you begin to find out what the truth is. A lot of your friends, a lot of your relatives, a lot of the people that you know that are far from God are blind to the truth of God because they are far from God. They don't do the will of God. Therefore, they don't know the words of God. And that's just a sad fact of the world that we live in. Why do people hate Jesus? Right? Well, he calls people out, for one. But they hate Jesus because they're living contrary to what Jesus teaches, and they can't even see the truth of what Jesus teaches. So for you, and kind of preaching to the choir here, people who are in church on Sunday morning, right? But for you, as you live the life that Jesus has called you to live, you go to church on Sunday morning, you don't swear, you don't chew, you don't go with girls who do, right? You begin to live a straight life. That pattern of living, that way of living begins to help you to see the truth of what Jesus teaches you. If you do the will of God, you find out whether the Jesus' teaching comes from God. You make a moral commitment. Now, second thing. Verse 18 says this. This is another way that you can understand. You can learn how to make a right judgment. Whoever speaks on their own does so to gain personal glory. But he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is a man of truth. There's nothing false about him. And then he says this. This is a little bit technical, but I think we can get through this. Okay? Jesus says this. He says, "Has not Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why are you trying to kill me?" And they think, "You're demon-possessed," the crowd answered. "Who's trying to kill you?" He goes on. Verse 21, Jesus says, "I did one miracle, and you're all amazed, and yet because Moses gave you circumcision, though it did not actually come from Moses, but from the patriarchs," that's true, you circumcise a boy on the Sabbath. Now, if a boy can be circumcised on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. So Jesus, what he's trying to say there is he's saying that you, on the religious leaders that you follow, you are following these religious practices, trying to keep yourself right with God. So the first thing Jesus says is that to make a right judgment, you have to make a moral commitment to follow the ways of Jesus so that you can start to understand the truth. The pattern of your life needs to begin to reflect the pattern of Jesus' life so that you can understand what is true. The second thing that he says here is that you cannot follow some strange religious patterns. You have to follow what is true. And the Jews have been following these religious rituals and these religious rules in order to get themselves right with God. So for example, circumcision is one of those things, and Jesus calls them out for it. He says, "Moses gave you the law, and yet you don't keep the law. Look, here's an example. You are doing work on the Sabbath." They're like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "Hey, what are you talking about?" And Jesus says, "You circumcise a child on the 8th day, even if that's the Sabbath, because you're trying to make sure and keep one law, and you end up breaking another law." And Jesus says you're missing the whole point by all of your religious rituals. The point is that one day, the Sabbath day will be fulfilled for everyone, and everyone will be healed. So here's the point. For you, church-going people, right? You've made a moral commitment to follow Christ. right? Going to church is making a moral commitment. That's what I do on Sunday morning. I go to church. But Jesus says, don't let your religious practices get in the way of real healing. Don't let the things that you hold on to religiously, because you value them, get in the way of really being healed. The point is that one day, everyone is going to be healed. Remember where the Sabbath comes from? Right? Remember where that comes from? You can say the Ten Commandments, right? It comes from the Ten Commandments. In the Ten Commandments, in the book of Exodus, it says that in 6 days, God created the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. We are waiting for that seventh day to come where we can rest from all of our work. Your moral commitment to doing what's right is not going to save you. Your religious commitment to being in church on Sunday morning and making sure that you follow all those practices, your religious commitments are not going to save you. What's going to save you is that one day God will let you enter into a Sabbath rest and you will be fully healed. You and I, in one sense, don't take this out of context. You and I, in one sense, are not saved yet. Right? We will be. So don't get me wrong. That's secure. That's solid. You're going to be saved. But right now, this here is not salvation, as fun as it is and as good as it is. One day, we will enter into a Sabbath rest. So don't let what you're committed to on Sunday morning, or the church that you're committed to on Sunday morning, or the building that we have, or the way that we do worship, don't let that get in the way of what God really wants from you. He wants you to be fully healed, enter into full life, enter into Sabbath rest with him. Last way that you can know that you're making a right judgment. You make a moral commitment to follow the ways of Jesus. You don't let all the religious stuff get in the way. You seek to be fully healed by Jesus. And the last thing here would be a spiritual commitment. I'm going to skip ahead to John 7:37. We'll touch on this more next week. Jesus says this: on the last and greatest day of the festival, this is the day where they bring jars of water up to the temple from the pool of Siloam. They bring these jars of water. They process them through the town. It's a big giant parade. I don't know if they have tractors in the parade, old tractors, because around here you have to have old tractors in the parade. But they have a big parade. And they bring all these jars of water up to the temple. They dump the water all around on the temple, and they talk about how God is cleansing the people. He's bringing water to the people who had marched through the desert. People are living in tents. They're living in booths, in shelters. 1 million people come to town. They're all living in tents. It's like Woodstock, right? But they're all living in tents. And then on this last and greatest day, there's this reminder that God provides for you by dumping water out on the temple. And it's a lot. So we see the abundance of the provision. On the last day of the festival, this great, beautiful picture, Jesus, it says, stands up and says in a loud voice, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." And by this, he meant the Spirit, who later on believers were going to get. The Spirit had not been given yet. But later on, when Jesus was resurrected from the dead and is glorified, the Spirit will come upon people. The last way that you would know in order to make a right judgment is the Spirit is living within you. When you commit your life to Jesus, when you choose to follow after Jesus, the Spirit comes to live within you and begins to show you what is real. It gives you new eyes to see, gives you new ears to hear, gives you a new mind so that you can understand. You have the mind of Christ living within you so that you can understand. Your prayer should be, Jesus, make me committed and bold to following your ways. Your moral ways, your moral teaching. Your prayer should be that, Lord, in my church, let us always look towards real healing, real forgiveness, and not towards the things that we do in church, your religious commitment to Jesus. And finally, you should always pray, Jesus, fill me with your Spirit so that I might know, so that I might see, so that I might feel the things that you feel, Jesus. Give me your mind, give me your eyes, so that I might see people the way that you see them. That should be your prayer. That should be our prayer. Because anyone who comes to Jesus and is thirsty, he will fill them up and give them life. I pray that he gives you life today. I pray that Jesus fills you with his Spirit today so that you might be full of what Jesus has in store for you when you enter into his rest. Would you stand? We're going to sing number 216.